Steve, you should get up on the live stream and start vamping a little bit. You should vamp a little bit for a live stream. Vamper? Or vamp? Vamper. Either way. Start talking shit about you being late. Actually,
How do I look, Bill?
Awesome.
So yes, we're waiting on DJ Wilson. We should be here tonight. You got a question here? I'll take it. Thanks. Yes, we're collecting. Right on. There's a good question here. I don't know, I'm supposed to talk on here. I don't want to lose any more viewers than I've already driven away, so I will step down. Lieutenant said he's on his way.
Okay. Hello. My name's Bill Streeter. And I'm hosting this live stream tonight from the Royale. And DJ Wilson is running late, so we'll be getting started whenever he gets here.
You're pushing viewership down, Bill.
I do have to say I had a delicious Missouri burger, which is locally sourced grass-fed beef, correct? It's delicious. I like it medium well. I like my burgers a little medium. I like my... Oh, look, there's DJ. I like my steaks rare.
DJ, you need a beer. Michael, you need a beer?
I have a beer.
You have a beer. DJ, you need a beer.
I might need one, too.
Need a beer?
Yeah, I'll do a stag. I'm going to eat stag tonight. It's delicious. Light and refreshing. Oh, look, there's DJ Wilson.
Better late than not at all.
We've been streaming for like an hour, waiting for you to arrive. I'm vamping, trying to keep the audience engaged. I don't know how well it's working, but you know. You should come down here at the Royale for a meal sometime. It's delicious. Food is awesome. For a bar, it's amazing food. They have an incredible beer list, and their cocktails are second to none. Thanks for joining our live stream. We'll be getting going soon.
Sure. You have pens and index cards. So prepared. What voice you have? Be prepared, right? Yeah.
That was vamping in the live stream.
No, I think you're the best. It's like they also brought in real loud too. One quote. Oh my goodness, I couldn't share
We get to start this damn thing.
Alright, where do you want me? I'm always off camera. In the hot seat? Antonio and Michael are on camera. I want to stay off. Yeah, no.
Just to let you know, I got
seniority here.
I got all the decor around here. I got the Aldermanic map.
Nice.
I got the Obama.
Visual aids.
You see the Obama lava lamp?
Thank you. I like
I
it.
got my historic American flag.
Oh, nice.
Well, your badge just fell off.
Oh,
We don't want people to forget who to vote for.
that's
here.
right. They may not recognize me if I don't have my sticker.
Are you wearing an American flag sticker?
They won't know who I am. That's gonna fall off.
Yeah.
All right. Bright lights. I can't even see anybody to answer the question.
That's the best part about being out here.
All right.
You really can't see the hecklers.
Nice.
I don't think your people will heckle us too much.
No.
We had some issues last week.
It is?
Yeah,
Damn.
people didn't really think DJ and I were being fair.
To who?
The president of the board.
Oh.
Yeah, we were like, I would say, and so let's talk about the boo. It's like I haven't even asked.
Your microphone's over there.
Oh, here.
You want something to drink, like water or beer or something like that?
Yes, a beer.
Oh, our first candidate.
Any particular style of beer?
No, surprise me. Whatever you drink.
The other candidates have declined to drink alcohol on camera.
Really?
Thinking,
Why not? We're at a bar.
they pretend to lie to like, well, I don't really drink. It's like, yeah, right. I see here. They want to set a good example.
I don't want to make a mess.
Oh man, so much to talk about
So
tonight.
much to talk about.
Tallow, right? No.
Hey, Bill, are we live?
You're live right now.
We should.
Get in live.
We've been live. Michael Allen's going to get me in trouble here.
I'm gonna get everybody in trouble.
Do we have a microphone?
I think I got a mic.
DJ, our podcast. I listened to it again.
Did we go on too long?
We went on forever, but we,
seemed like
I think
we had a good conversation.
we're causing some trouble in this town.
We
I
had.
thought it was good though.
And Tony was on live podcast Monday,
Right.
but then we did a preview.
Oh,
to,
you got it.
Oh, yeah, we turned this into a podcast too.
All right. All right.
So we take the audio from the live stream,
Okay.
and we do a little, and then we get together at my
Sad
place and
that
do a little intro
we missed
to it.
the
Okay.
Sort of talk
questions
how
about
the
Reed
state
as
of
president
the
that I
like
asked. That part didn't pick up, so
Just,
I'm tempted to go back to listen to some of the shit that was said because I can't remember half of it.
well, you guys had a few beers.
Well, no. Well, you are, pray tell, the last hurrah.
You are.
You're the last person.
The last one.
Most been done, except for, of course, Pastor Jimmy Matthews.
Oh, that's right.
at the beginning I want to.
Which may not happen.
by Urban Chestnut.
Thank you. Urban Chestnut, you said?
Do we have to drop that in like each question? As I was passing by Urban Chestnut the other day, I thought of this question.
It's the black blogger at that.
Oh, thank you.
I want to announce
that was
the ninth board debate.
Oh my God!
Too.
So that's tomorrow night.
That's Thursday.
If you were to go by views of the live stream, which doesn't mean anything really, the state of the race right now would be, if you were going to count those as polls, be Tashara, Cruson, Boyd, and then Reed, actually, which is surprising.
Oh, boy.
Maybe not.
We got some.
I got to tell people to share this.
All right,
huh?
thank you for coming down, guys. This is the Royale Mayoral Closeups. My name is Steve. I'm the proprietor here. I'm not going to talk too long, but I am sort of the sergeant at arms, and the last time I did have to kind of intervene, and I will intervene again, very kindly, and eject anyone that's having a problem.
Jimmy Matthews here.
I think that Austin. Anyway, I have cards here for questions, so raise your hands if you have any questions, and I will submit them to the questioners here. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to guys better at talking.
I want to back up. If there's any fisticuffs, Michael's going to back up Steve, okay? So you better watch out. All right, I'm DJ Wilson. I'm on Collateral Damage, a podcast on KDHX. It's collateraldamage.kdhx.tra.org. Antonio was done there last Monday. I've had everybody except Tashara is going to be done Thursday. But they're all in that file. I'm getting stopped and dragging forward. I also write for STLMag.com, and STLMag.com has coverage of the race too. Check on that. And here's Michael Allen.
All right, thanks, DJ. So, Michael Allen, been involved in politics and public policy in the city for a long, long time, inside, outside, and on every side. Currently teaching at Washington University in St. Louis and running the Preservation Research Office. I'll plug my URL, michael-allen.org. Probably won't find any mayoral coverage there. Also want to say up front, there are more chances to hear candidates at the mayoral and local levels. There will be an all-candidate forum at the Luminary Arts Center on Monday, the 27th, 7 p.m., hosted by citizen artist STL, focused on arts and culture issues. This Thursday, however, will be a rumble in the 9th Ward. I will be moderating it. I can't pay DJ enough, apparently, to join me as wingman, but I'm going into this battle. Oh, okay.
Free beer.
4 beers. So it's going to be Ken Ortman and Dan Gunther at 6:30, 2720 Cherokee.
Which one has more tattoos?
Oh, man.
I don't know what to talk
Yeah,
about.
best aldermanic tattoo contest. I think Ortman won. We'll get to you at tonight's Q&A and find out if there's something hidden under that suit. But
I might need a few more beers.
and then we have a 15th Ward forum. Steve, when is that 15th Ward
March
forum?
1st.
March 1st. And that'll be very polite and a handshake, I'm sure, at every round.
Definitely the sergeant at arms will be there as well.
Megan Green and Jennifer Florida. Which one do you want to re-elect?
They're both up for re-election, apparently.
Yeah, it's very
That's what the
interesting.
sign says.
Never heard of any of that. So, and this is our last forum for our mayor here at the Royale.
For the primary.
For the primary.
right.
We may regroup with Republican, Green, Independent, and Democratic nominees.
I hope to be back.
They'll be back. So, DJ, anything else?
Don't forget that he's finished.
All right.
Oh, that,
We'll let you talk.
Well, we're going to turn this over to Antonio for an opening statement. He's coming on the heels of an endorsement from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch yesterday. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, tonight, but we'll let you have 3 or 4 minutes to tell the crowd who you are and why you're here.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Thank you. Nice crowd. I appreciate you coming out. We only have 2 weeks left before this election day. So this is one of my few opportunities to come and talk to the folks here at the Royale. My name is Antonio French. I've been here a lot. I'm an alderman in the city of St. Louis. I've been involved in politics now for 16 years here in St. Louis. I've been an elected official for about 9 years. Before that, I worked in journalism. I was a reporter in town covering politics and education. I also got a lot of people elected, managing my own consulting firm, managing campaigns, before I decided to throw my own hat into the ring. I decided to come back to St. Louis after college. You know, I grew up, born and raised here, and like so many of us, we say we're going to leave the city and never come back. Going to a place with more opportunity, more folks, better jobs. But, you know, I decided to come back home. I decided to roll up my sleeves and try to make our city a better place. I moved back to the neighborhood that I grew up in North St. Louis, in the O'Fallon neighborhood, next to O'Fallon Park. Same neighborhood that my mom and dad grew up in. In fact, on the same street that my mom and dad both lived on. That's how they met. And now I live on that street with my wife and my little boy. My wife's here, Yasenka. Give her a shout out. And so now, you know, after 10 years working in city government, I am looking to become your mayor. I think that this city is at a point where we need some rapid change in our city. I need to do what? Is that better?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, less feedback.
Thanks. Thanks, MC. You know, we have an opportunity in March, I think, to take our city into a different direction. For the last 15, 16 years, we have really been focused on that central corridor downtown. It's been a top-down strategy of transforming our city. It has not been a strategy that empowers people, our communities, our neighborhoods. And we have forgotten where most of the folks live in the city, in neighborhoods, both in South St. Louis and in North St. Louis. So as mayor, what I'm looking to do is turn our attention back to the people who still live in this city, the 315,000 people who still live in our city, to try to make this a place that they want to stay in and to entice more people to live in. We have to start taking care of the things that really matter. Public safety in our neighborhoods, redeveloping vacant buildings, creating jobs, the quality of schools, to make sure that our neighborhoods are places where we want to raise our families in. So I'm looking forward to a long discussion tonight, a good productive discussion. I know DJ and Michael are going to ask some hard questions, and then I look forward to answering your questions as well. Thank you for coming out.
All right. Thanks, Antonio. Can I ask people in the crowd first, briefly, who's undecided? Raise your hand. All right. See that, Antonio?
Nice.
Oh, Steve Smith's undecided.
Steve Smith.
He better be
All
undecided.
right. Well, yeah, we should too, probably. And also, if you have more questions, there's a lot already piling up here. We have these index cards, so you can get them from Steve and Bill down here.
All right.
Bill Streeter, our technology guru. So I'm going to start with a question. Antonio, something we've never talked about, we go way back, but I was watching last year the debate on the football stadium for the Rams, and you kind of broke ranks from some of the other progressive aldermen, negotiated a crime plan, ended up voting for the stadium. But I'm sitting around at home looking at what happened with the stadium and looking at, you know, what's happening with policing under Chief Dotson in the mayor's office, where the North Side doesn't seem that big of a priority. And I'm like, did Antonio leverage a fake stadium for a fake crime plan? What's up with that?
Well, thanks for the question, Michael. So listen, first of all, I am never a big supporter of public financing for stadium deals. And so when the Rams came and that deal came forward, first thing we did was ask for it to be put up for a public vote. The mayor refused to do that. We introduced a bill to require a public vote. The mayor's supporters stalled it in committee and it didn't come out. So we were forced to take a stand on this thing. So what we did was hold it up in committee, stop it until the mayor sat down with us to deal with the #1 issue facing our city, which is violent crime. This is the first time in 8 years being on that board that we actually got to talk to the mayor about crime and force him to deal with this issue. Up until that point, it was just deny, to say that crime is not a big problem in the city, that everything is getting okay, and that the violent crime is only in a few neighborhoods. So we forced him to deal with this issue. We put together a comprehensive crime package. He did not adopt all of it. The part that he did adopt was the Focus 15 component, which is part of my crime plan, which focuses our efforts on the 15 neighborhoods in the city that account for 60% of the violent crime. So we got that. Once we got that, we also had one other requirement. that if this thing was going to get built, it had to have two requirements. Number one is that it would not spend one public dime, not one taxpayer dollar here in the city of St. Louis, unless it was matched by over $1 billion in private and state money. And number two is that it would have the highest level of minority participation that we have ever had on any city project. And so we sat down with everybody and worked that out. First time that's ever been done on this deal. Now, to me, it became very clear that this deal was not going to go very far because it required somebody who said they didn't want to spend a dime to stay in St. Louis. It required them to spend $500 million. But in order to get to the next step, we had to present our offer first. And so we did. As a city, we passed the bill. Again, not one city taxpayer dime would be spent without $1 billion in matching money from both the NFL, the Rams, and the state. And so we passed it, and as suspected, and as I said in my speech on the floor of the Board of Aldermen, which you may remember, is that it died because the guy who said he didn't want to be here didn't move forward and respond to it. And so, you know, each of these deals, the details matter. And so it's not just as simple as to say we should be against everything. You know, I operate down the Board of Aldermen in a minority position. And so I try to get what I can for our community, for our issues, for our priorities from a minority position. And I think on that deal, that is how politics should work. And so we got a better deal. And at the end of the day, city taxpayers didn't spend anything because the deal didn't go anywhere. But we did get a comprehensive crime plan. But I will tell you, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so we need a new police chief. And I'm glad that we're actually going to have an opportunity to get a new mayor and a new police chief that really focuses on public safety, and you don't have to drag them to deal with the #1 issue facing our city.
Okay. I'll ask you one question about this, and I'll let you answer, and I'll ask some belligerent questions after that. Okay. As many of you may have seen, the Post-Dispatch endorsed Antonio on Sunday. My first question is, were you surprised, and what's your reaction to that?
You know, I was pretty surprised, but you know, we actually had a really good editorial board meeting. It went much longer than we had allocated, and it was really productive. It was a very good conversation in which we did not agree with everything each other said, but we presented our cases, and I could explain to them why I felt differently than they did. So it was a productive conversation, and I think you know, as they wrote in the piece, what impressed them, I guess, about me and my position was first being willing to sit down with somebody I disagree with and have a conversation, and then also to hold myself accountable. And so what we worked out in that conversation was that if I become mayor, I would depend on the Post-Dispatch to hold me accountable, to make sure that I am doing what I say I'm going to do, and to make sure we are making progress in the city. So we will have every 6 months, the Post-Dispatch will judge us on a report card. And so we will set our goals for the next 6 months, and then the Post-Dispatch will come back and tell us if we have met those goals and if we have done what we said we were going to do. And I think that's the relationship that elected officials need to have with the media. That's a sharp contrast to what we're seeing in Washington right now with Trump and the media, and even some of the other campaigns in this race in the media. You have to have that relationship with the media, and I think that works better for the public.
Who was in that meeting with you with the board? Was it Deb Peterson, Kevin Horrigan, Todd Robertson? Was anybody else in there?
Karan, the reporter, and the editor, Gil. Yes,
all right. My belligerence is not against you, Antonio. Okay. It's against the Post-Dispatch. Okay. When they say the March 7th mayoral primaries offer St. Louis a basic choice, maintain an unacceptable status quo, or take a chance on substantially new direction. Where has the Post been for the last 16 years in this unacceptable status quo? In their coverage and their editorial stance and anything they've ever done? I mean, I think... Okay.
Oh, please don't put me in a position of defending the Post-Dispatch.
No, attack them, please.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, as you know, I have been a harsh critic of the Post-Dispatch over the last 16 years, going all the way back to my Pub Def days when I was a journalist. You know, me and the Post-Dispatch had a lot of knockdown, drag-out fights over the years. And I think ultimately, though, you know, there are a lot of different folks who I vehemently disagree with. And I think at the end of the day, though, I respect them and they respect me. And so it is not about agreeing with folks all the time, But just as they say they're going to hold me accountable, I plan to hold them accountable as well.
It just seems like a weird premise, though. If they say it's an unacceptable status quo for the last 16 years, and where have they been to call the mayor out on that?
I agree, but they're also, and this was also a pleasant surprise from the last time I sat down with the editorial board. There are some different faces there.
Jeff Peterson and Ted Robertson.
Yeah, and that changes. That changes a little bit. It's good to have a different perspective. I think just as we are going to get a new mayor, and hopefully we can take this government into a more progressive direction. I hope that the Post-Dispatch will also follow that direction, and we can get some editorials that are more reflective of St. Louis, and specifically St. Louis City agenda and priorities. And
two more quick questions on the editorial. One of the lines is, to be a successful mayor, French would have to modulate his tone. What the hell does that mean?
Yeah. So I'll tell you this. I wasn't offended by that because, frankly, when I made the switch from pub def reporter to alderman, now keep in mind, when I was a pub def reporter before, I was covering the alderman. And so I joined a group, most of which I have been very critical of over the years. And in order to get something done, I had to become a legislator instead of a journalist on that board. And so in that way, you do have to fit the role. And so it is true. I have been a very vocal North Side advocate. That has been what I have been known for years, is representing poor folks, representing people who have been, I think, marginalized and not included at the table. I've been very vocal about that over the years. As I seek this new role, I am seeking to represent a larger group of people. So I am trying to keep everybody at the table, but everybody at the table means everybody, not just one group. So I understood that. I was not offended by that because I think my role as mayor is different from my role as 21st Ward Alderman. And even now, I'll have to build relationships with the governor, who obviously I very much disagree about. And as an alderman from the 21st Ward, I can be very harsh and I can throw a lot of stones. But as the mayor, I have to be able to sit down with him and try to get something done for our city.
Okay, my last question on this topic. Because, you cannot have a mayor race in St. Louis without conspiracy theories, okay? So I'm bringing up this conspiracy theory about the editorial, that the Post was kind of painted in a corner because of Tishar's letter and his criticism. If it would have endorsed Lida, it would have looked as though they were knee-jerk predictable. And in this way, they accomplished two things. This is the conspiracy theory talking, not me. Okay, two things. One, they hurt Tishara and they helped Lida by supposedly splitting the progressive vote. And they also appeal to a younger crowd because most of the Post readers look like me, old white men. Okay, so there was some ulterior motives here. What's your reaction to that?
So first, I don't think Tishara needs any help hurting herself with. I think it hurts when you don't show up. That's what hurts. And I don't think that. I don't buy this idea of some vast white conspiracy to help Lida. I think Lida is very comfortable where she is, and I expect that we're gonna. What we've been talking about in the campaign is we're going to rope-a-dope her because she's feeling very comfortable and she feels like she's in the lead and doesn't have to do too much. I hope she continues that for the next 14 days because we're coming. And I don't think that I don't think the Post-Dispatch endorsement of her would have been a factor at all. That's usually what they would have done, I think. But based on the conversations I had with the folks in that room at the editorial board. We just outperformed the other ones. When they ask tough questions, most of the other candidates don't have a follow-up answer. They don't really know these issues. And I think it's very clear for anybody that has an opportunity to ask a question, a follow-up question, and maybe even a third question of Lida Crewson is that she doesn't really know this city very well. She knows the areas that she knows. She knows the areas that she's worked in as a part-time alderman, but she doesn't know areas that really have the biggest challenges for this city. She doesn't know poverty issues. She doesn't know issues of inequality, racial division, the things that have been holding our city back for 50 years. And that is a problem for this city. We have been on a path that is not working. We have seen 80,000 people move out of this city during the time Francis Slay has been mayor. And if we keep down that trajectory, there won't be much of St. Louis left. And I think we're at a point that even folks who have been riding this slave train for a while say that we need some change.
All right. Well, and speaking of modulating your tone, you will be spinning records after the question and answer tonight.
Yes,
so
I will.
Not the first mayoral candidate to spin in this room this month, but maybe the first one to be picking his own tune.
Yes. Spinning of a different kind.
So, speaking of concrete policy answers, I've probably asked everyone who's come and sat in the vaunted chair at the Royale about tax increment financing. And I'm sure I don't need to say much to you about projects that have been in the news lately. The Westminster Place project's been making the rounds with St. Louis Magazine kind of pointing out some of the problems there, and the next STL jumping in and defending it as sort of, well, this is just how things are, and this provides good benefits to the whole city, and there's another side to this question, and that article's been out there circulating. I saw David Richardson, a TIF attorney, posted that on his Twitter account. There are projects like the Foundry, 44% of the budget comes from public subsidy, and it's been making the rounds trying to recruit businesses out of the Central West End, Cherokee Street, and the Grove with limited success. But still, a couple businesses are moving there.
Right.
Some have called that a 21st century St. Louis Center or Union Station. So that's not a good analogy, right?
That's not a good thing.
Sucking
That's
capital
not one of
out.
our better moments.
But I've asked the candidates, and the most specific answer I think I got was from Lyda Cruson, who said, "Oh, it's more art than science, so it's still going to come down to a deal by deal."
That's not very specific.
And she said, we just need more planners to inform those decisions. And Tashara Jones wants a commission to study it, which I don't. Not a very strong answer, but. So what should we do, are we missing the point when we're focusing so much on tax increment financing, tax abatement? You're talking a lot about equity. Is that the thing to do? And if it is the thing to do, what should be done?
Yeah.
Or is it something more systemic that we're missing?
So let me tell you how this works right now. The problem with St. Louis development right now, it is completely developer driven. Okay, so what happens right now is that the city and SLDC, our development agencies, pretty much sit back and wait for developers to come to us with projects. They come to the city with a project and say, hey, I want to do this house, I want to do this building, and I need this kind of incentive to make it happen. In fact, as you mentioned, Dave Richardson, they usually write the bills themselves. And so that is a problem because we as a city have to decide what is in our priorities. What are we trying to do as a city? What areas are we trying to build up? What are our goals? Our goals need to be reducing crime and population stability. And so that is not something that focuses on the central corridor. Our challenge is in neighborhoods, both in South St. Louis and North St. Louis. And so when we spend all of 90% of our incentives in the central corridor, that is fulfilling somebody else's goal, which is to maximize profit. And so we've gotten to a point now where incentives are not being used what they were meant to do. As you know, it's usually this project could not happen but for this incentive is the standard that we're supposed to be using. Instead, it is being used to simply make the project more profitable. And so when you drive through St. Louis, you see areas that are sincerely, undeniably blighted. You drive down areas in South St. Louis and in North St. Louis that are clearly blighted. And when you pass this legislation or introduce this legislation down at the Board of Aldermen, say you want to give a $10 million tax break to somebody doing something downtown, we have to legally call that area next to Busch Stadium blighted. And that's really an insult to folks who live in communities that need development. And so what we have to do as a city, and this starts with the mayor's office, the SLDC, all the development agencies, and all that legislation, all that TIF stuff, and all that begins and ends in the executive branch. We have to have a mayor who looks at the entire city and says that for the next 5 or 10 years, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to stabilize the population in these neighborhoods. We're trying to reduce violent crime in these areas. Reducing violent crime does not just involve police. That involves economic development, jobs, making sure we're focusing our resources. That involves incentives, making sure we have small businesses in those areas. So that's the problem. Right now, we sit back and let somebody else set the agenda for us. We need a mayor who sets the agenda and one that reflects the priorities of our entire city.
All right, I have two follow-ups. One is, so you did mention developers driving this process, but can we read into that lack of demand for North City or South City? if the developers are driving this and they're majority in central corridor, is that really coming from the incentives or is that coming from the market?
Well, but see, that's the problem, is that incentives are designed to stimulate demand. And so if the incentives shouldn't follow demand. Demand shouldn't follow incentives. And so if we want to stimulate small business growth in impoverished, blighted areas, that's where the incentives need to be. So if you want to get a 20-year tax abatement, it needs to be in those areas where we need to see economic development occurring. It is no reason at this point that there should be a 10 or a 20-year tax abatement in the Central West End. That market is established. That market is there. There is demand. We need to move those incentives to areas where we need to stimulate demand.
All right. Second follow-up. This comes from the audience. Are you in favor of community benefits agreements? These are used in other cities to leverage these big developments. You probably remember as well as I do, back when Paul McKee first got his legislation in 2009, many residents of St. Louis Place and Old North fought for a community benefits agreement, but were rebuffed by the Slay administration.
Yeah. No,
should we be using those?
Yeah, community benefit agreements are very good. They work in a lot of work successfully in a lot of cities around the country. It is not something we have used enough in St. Louis City. We need to be using these on our larger projects, especially the really big ones that are transforming neighborhoods. So like the NGA project, for instance, that actually is flattening a neighborhood and moving all the people out. We need to make sure that the end stage of this project is something that is building up what remains of that community for the people who are still there.
All right, and I actually have a third follow-up briefly. So, I know, we can talk about these issues all the time, but
we'll get to you one day.
Tashara Jones mentioned her favoring inclusionary zoning, likes to use New York City to make sure that when we do subsidize something like the 100 North project on Kings Highway, that at least a floor or two will be affordable housing. What do you think about that tool?
I think it is a tool in our toolbox that we should use more often. We don't really use that at all in St. Louis City. I think I've heard her and maybe another candidate say we should flatly use it on all projects. I think it is a tool that should be used, and we should always be using these. We should always keep in mind how a project, especially in an affluent area, can help build up other areas. And an example of that is what we did with Ballpark Village Phase 2. In that area, what we're doing is that $5 million, and this is my amendment, is that $5 million from that project, when it is completed, will be used to create low-income loans and grants for businesses opening up in small and low-income areas. And so up to 100 new small businesses can come out of that one big downtown project. So there are ways to be able to use new money from big central projects to stimulate growth in areas that need incentives.
Sounds like it's bigger than just housing in your mind.
Yeah, it's not just housing. I mean, because you get back to this problem is that we have right now a demand problem in St. Louis. We have a city that was built for almost 1 million people and only 300,000 left. And so it is more than just building new houses. It's about making sure that these neighborhoods are at the level that people want to stay in their current house and stay in the city. Too many people are deciding just to leave the city entirely because of these issues that we've been neglecting.
This reveals what a sick man I am. I had 30 minutes of downtime today from the day job. I was off, and I was rereading an Orwell essay on Gandhi. Okay.
I wish I had that free time.
Well, listen, you don't want my life, Antonio. Trust me. But this one phrase jumped out, and I'm clearly not comparing you to Gandhi, so I want to get that up front. But there's an issue here. There's an issue here that pertains, I think, to your transition from Ferguson to politics. This is Orwell writing. In Gandhi's case, the question one feels inclined to ask are, to what extent was Gandhi moved by vanity, by the consciousness of himself as a humble, naked old man sitting on a praying mat and shaking empires by sheer spiritual power? And to what extent did he compromise his own principles by entering into politics, which of their nature are inseparable from coercion and fraud? In other words, you were on the streets of Ferguson, you had a high profile there, but then you got in politics. That's a whole nother game, coercion and fraud. How have you navigated that, and how have you avoided coercion and fraud?
So first, I was in politics before.
Well, okay.
So,
that's the premise.
Yeah, so I have been in politics now for 16 years. And as part of my job as an alderman and trying to stabilize these areas that I think have been forgotten for a long time, one of the things I've done as a practice is go to crime scenes. So when I know that somebody has been shot and there's been an act of violence, I go out there because I know there's this broken relationship between the police and the community. And I try to act as a conduit because people know me, they know my reputation, they trust me, and they'll get me information that they may not get to police. And so, in that August 2014 day, I had finished my day of being an alderman, going to neighborhood meetings that Saturday and everything, and got home. And I heard that a young man had been killed down the street from me, right down West Florissant. Even though it's in Ferguson, it's really right down West Florissant from my house. And so I decided to go and do what I always do, is try to be a conduit. And so, yeah, there's been this criticism that has come afterwards that French just went down there for the cameras. There were no cameras when I went down there. Okay, there was no cameras at all. There aren't cameras at these crime scenes when I go to them. I go to try to talk to the people and be with the people. Now, when I went to that area, that was unlike any crime scene I had ever seen. And what happened over the next few days and months, of course, everybody knows. I am the only candidate running that has given up his seat. So whatever happens in 2 weeks, I will not be a member of the Board of Aldermen anymore. I am giving up my seat to run for this office. So either I will go up to a position where I can help more people and have more resources to help more folks, or I will be free from politics. And that is okay with me too. I am not trying to be what's the phrase, a career politician. That was never my goal. I'm just here to help people for as long as I can, and I feel like I've done as much I can in this current position. If the voters want me in this new spot, I give them that opportunity. If not, I can go do something else, and I'll be happy to do that.
When you, with the North Campus deal and the nonprofit, would you continue that even if you're not in politics?
Oh yeah, we made a long-term commitment to the kids in North Campus. Now, North Campus is something that we started 5 years ago. I've acted as a board member and a volunteer CEO for that. Never took a dime, no money for it, no salary, and in fact, it costs me money because when we don't have money to make payroll, my wife and I write the checks to pay everybody to keep it going. So we made a long-term commitment to the kids in that program. We have over 122, and we plan to see them through to make sure they have a pathway to success in life that is not currently being provided by the school system.
Well, I guess that's what I meant. And you have a cause there that you may leave politics behind if you don't win. So the cause would continue, though, right? Oh,
my commitment to my city and my neighborhood remains, and there are different ways. And in fact, I think you mentioned Ferguson. I feel like in many ways, me holding office was a limitation because people don't trust politicians. And people think there's an ulterior motive all the time for doing something, so I'm happy to be free of elected office if that's what happens. But I am looking forward to hopefully being in a position to be able to help more folks and to really deal with some of the root causes of some of these issues that I've been dealing with as alderman for a very long time. I think the power for real change is in room 200, and that's why I'm running right now.
All right. Walk down the hall for a second to room 230 in the Board of Aldermen.
All right. You've
been on the board. You're in your second term, which is coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
You were on the board for the first Paul McKee round.
Yep.
Back in those days, Scott Ogilvie, Kara Spencer, Megan Green probably hadn't even thought about running for office yet.
All right.
So you've been on for a long time. You rose up to be vice chair of public safety. You haven't chaired a committee yet, but
I'm the chair of public utilities.
You are chair of public utilities. Okay, I stand corrected.
My lights are still on.
So
it's not a very busy committee.
In those 2 terms, what were some of your key goals, and what is something you've been proud to accomplish, and what's something you didn't accomplish but wish you had?
Yeah. So in the two terms I've been on the Board of Aldermen, number one, my main focus has always been on quality of life in neighborhoods. And so when I look at the O'Fallon neighborhood, the Penrose neighborhood, the College Hill neighborhoods, those are the neighborhoods that make up the 21st Ward. What really attracted me or prompted me to run was that this neighborhood that I grew up in was really deteriorating. And we had seen this level of blight and deterioration start to take root that was really detrimental to the future of our city and whether or not I wanted to continue to live in that neighborhood. And so in my time in the Board of Aldermen, I think we have transformed our area and really turned the trajectory of where our neighborhood was going. You know, O'Fallon Park has been completely transformed. When I took office, that place was basically an abandoned public space where it was nothing but guys drinking beer and selling drugs there all day. Now we've got a $20 million recreation center. We rehabbed the boathouse. We've got a new basketball court. It's a place now where you go in the morning and there's families. You see moms pushing strollers. That did not happen 8 years ago. We have opened up 3 after-school centers for kids now. There was nothing before. Now we got spaces where over 120 kids can come every day for free, get mentoring, stay off the streets, not get involved in trouble and crime. And then down on the Board of Aldermen, we passed legislation that actually has made a difference, I think. It was my legislation that created the Civilian Oversight Board in the city. That's a step in the right direction. As mayor, I would add to that to make sure it had even more teeth. But now there is at least a body that people can go to report complaints about police activity. That had been, as you know, a 15-year effort to try to get that established. It was passed before, and Francis Slay vetoed it. Lyda Cruzen also voted against it back in the day. And so, we have now that. We've passed legislation to add public arts funding. Now that is on the books. Francis has not enforced it. And that is something that is on the books, and as mayor, I will finally enforce it so that money is going into that pot to pay for public art projects across the city. And so, we've made a difference, I think. It is always from, the main thing you have to navigate, and this is what I tell some of the new young progressives down at the Board of Aldermen, is you have to learn how to navigate from a minority voting position. Because it is not enough to just say you voted against everything. It's not enough just to say, I stood firm and opposed everything. Your folks want you to get something accomplished. And so you have to figure out a way to work with people you disagree with and get something accomplished on behalf of your constituents. And I think I've done that.
Okay, we're going to start reading questions from the crowd here. This is kind of a long one, but it's a good question. The New York Times recently published a critique of de Blasio for calling New York City a sanctuary city while maintaining broken windows policing policies that continue to funnel poor people of color into federal prisons. What would be your plan to truly make St. Louis a sanctuary city, not just for undocumented immigrants, but for all people of color who are most at risk of ending up in the system simply by being poor? Hello, that's a question.
That's a lot of questions. All right, so first with the sanctuary city policy. So, I actually passed a resolution just a couple of weeks ago at the Board of Aldermen to have the city study the possibility of becoming a sanctuary city or at least protecting our foreign-born population. Now, the challenge we have is that there's not just this threat from Trump to withhold federal funding. There's actually already a state law on the books that says that state funding will be withheld if we declare ourselves a sanctuary city. So absent of actually declaring ourselves a sanctuary city and risking Republicans acting a fool up in Jefferson City, there are different ways we can be a de facto sanctuary city and still protect our foreign-born population and protect the civil rights of everybody in St. Louis. The last thing we want to do, especially with the rate of violent crime and the issues we have in our city, the last thing we want to do is start directing our police to start harassing people because of how they look in St. Louis City. We already have a broken relationship with so many communities, including African American community and other communities of color. The last thing we need to do is further deteriorate that relationship by having our officers becoming more adversarial with the foreign-born population. We need that population to cooperate with us, the city, and police in order to make our city a safer place. And so I think this attempt to target foreign-born population is short-sighted on behalf of Republicans, both at the state and federal level. It's tearing us apart, and it's really, I think, completely antithetical to who we are as Americans.
So many trailheads from that question, as you said.
There were some other questions there too about the broken windows.
Yeah, broken window policy.
You want to hit that one, broken windows?
Go for it.
So the broken windows policy, especially in the last 2.5 years, has really gotten it's become kind of a lightning rod. People are talking about, this is something that really targets minorities. Now, I'll tell you, representing an area that has not seen high standards from the city government, has not seen enforcement of laws, has not seen maintaining of vacant buildings, vacant lots, alleys, streets. Many citizens in my neighborhood often ask for there to be more enforcement of some of the minor things. In fact, there's kind of an ongoing conversation that the only time you see police in some areas is when there's a murder. That some of the more minor things, before we even get to a homicide, don't even get attention. And so there has to be a balance. I am a big proponent of having more community-oriented police, where police are there long enough. They have built relationships with people, and so they know the folks in the community, and the people know them. And so there is this kind of partnership. If you have this more occupying force model that many neighborhoods have and many cities have across the country, where the only time you see police is when they're coming to arrest somebody or to harass you, that is not what we want in St. Louis. But I do think we do need enforcement of some of the minor things, including speeding. I mean, how many people live in residential areas where cars just fly down the street? You drive down Natural Bridge and cars literally do donuts in the middle of the street. There does need to be some enforcement here, so I don't think it's all or none, but I think we need to raise the quality of life in our neighborhood, and that involves a relationship between the police department and the community.
All right. From broken windows to opaque glass, the opaque glass on a surveillance camera. You've been a defender of this as a tool.
That was quite a transition there.
I know. And you've defended the use of this tool. You've used it in your ward. You've said it's a city model. The north side should get more cameras. The ACLU of Eastern Missouri published a report critical of surveillance cameras, singling your ward and your use out. Is this constitutional? Is one question. The second question is it effective? Because some people in the law enforcement community, even if they say it's legal and constitutional, really doesn't always catch someone.
Yeah. So for the first
why do you
question,
like it so much? And is it constitutional? Is it effective? And what should we be doing if you are mayor? What would you do with surveillance cameras?
Yeah, so I am a supporter of surveillance cameras. We were the first ward in the 21st ward to implement this technology, and it has been very effective. In fact, when I became alderman, the first year I came in, the 21st ward was leading the city in homicides. We had more homicides than anybody else in the city. And within 24 months, we dropped homicides in my ward by 80%. Now, it's not just cameras, it's a combination between adding that technology in areas that were really experiencing the most level of violence and drug activity, but also working to triple the number of block units, organizing community days where we repaired houses and cleaned up vacant lots, and just changed the characteristics of these neighborhoods, and so they didn't experience as much violence. But as far as surveillance cameras, though, this cat is out of the bag. Okay, surveillance cameras are everywhere, and so to me,
I think we're on camera right now. Actually,
exactly. Oh,
multiple points.
And so it makes no sense to me that when you go downtown to a ball game, there's cameras everywhere, but when you go to the neighborhoods in the city where most of the murders occur, there aren't any cameras. And so the biggest problem facing us right now regarding violent crime is that over 60% of homicides are unsolved. Okay, so when we start talking about putting cameras in violent areas, I'm not talking about, prosecuting somebody who was smoking weed on the corner. What I'm talking about is catching people who are murdering people. And so what we have caught on our cameras have literally people killing other people. Our videos have been used to put people away who have murdered other people. Because what happens in too many neighborhoods is that people are so fearful that they don't come forward because they still live next door, to the murderers or to people who are friends or relatives of the murderers. And so something can happen in broad daylight with 20 people out front, and very few people are willing to come forward. What that camera provides is an unafraid witness with evidence that we can use to put bad guys away, the most violent criminals. So what I do is I do think we need to expand surveillance cameras in the city. We need to put them especially in the areas where we've seen the most violence. We're talking about a city that has 2,000 shootings a year. We do need to deploy technology to those areas to help get some of the most violent criminals off the street.
So you think it's constitutional?
It is constitutional. I mean, this is solved. This thing has been litigated. It's over. There's some we're way behind. Some cities have thousands of cameras. We still are largely relying on private cameras in St. Louis. We do need to have, I think, a centralized strategy on where to deploy cameras, and really the areas I think we need to deploy them are the most violent areas where murders are occurring.
I have a second little follow-up, which is, I'll go ahead, which is, it seems like on this issue, you and Chief Sam Dotson would agree. He pushed for funding for real-time surveillance center. He pushed for increased use of surveillance cameras as part of policing, but you want to fire Dotson.
Well, let's back up. So let's back up. So number one, when we implemented our surveillance camera program, we did that under Chief Isom. And we had a good relationship with Isom. Isom was a very good chief. And he even provided a neighborhood officer to help monitor the cameras and to deal with evidence. So it was always a direct line of chain of evidence. When Dotson came in, Dotson, you may recall, was against cameras. Dotson said that he felt that having officers watch cameras was a waste of police resources and would not view our Northside cameras. We even installed an antenna and a rig down at North Patrol so officers could monitor them right there at North Patrol. Dotson refused. He said he thought it was a waste of time. It wasn't until 2 years later that he changed his tune and said, not only am I now in favor of cameras, I need $8 million to build a high-tech surveillance camera system, monitoring system down at City Hall. I said, $8 million? We built ours for like $2,000. Why do you need $8 million? And so he didn't get that money. Somehow he miraculously figured out how to do it for about $200,000.
Cut the painting and
but yet still, when you go down to the Real-Time Intelligence Center, the cameras that are on display are the affluent part of town. There are no Northside cameras up there. So the areas still where most of the murders are occurring, both in the violent neighborhoods in North St. Louis and in the rough neighborhoods in South St. Louis, aren't on the screen. But where the tourists are, that's where they're watching. And again, it shows how the view of the administration right now is to focus on the areas where tourists are. This vision of St. Louis City being a place where it's the playground of the suburbians. But the people who actually live in this city, who are dealing with the violence on a daily basis, don't get that level of attention. So I do think we need a new police chief. And I've said publicly that on day one, we're moving to fire Sam Dotson. We need a new police chief, and for the first time in our city's history, do a national search to get the best and the brightest, somebody who has experience in a city like St. Louis, the size of St. Louis, who has shown results in reducing violent crime, who has shown results in repairing that broken relationship between the community and police. But I think Dotson has burned so many bridges that he needs to go. Does that bell mean I'm out of time, or what does that bell mean?
Oh no, we're gonna go.
Okay.
We're gonna go on for a long time. What? The surveillance cameras that you first had, did you have those in your own house at some point?
A surveillance camera in my own
Yeah, the
house?
surveillance cameras. Where were those initial surveillance cameras housed? That you
No,
had?
we have a monitoring station at our 21st Ward office.
The ward office.
Yeah, in the ward office. Now there's remote viewing available for our neighborhood officers and others. But yeah, we have big screens set up, and that's where people could, the police officers will watch.
Okay, we have two questions here that are related to what you just talked about. You've already said about Dotson, okay? Given your history with the St. Louis Police Department, how will you build a positive relationship with them? That's the first part. The second part is, do you support the reworking of districts? Soulard lost 2 patrols full-time with the current redistricting of the districts.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first, regarding police officers. So let me say first that the police union is not police officers on the street. Okay, and so the police officers on the street, especially the ones that have worked, I worked with for years in the district, 6th district, where my ward is. We have good relationships. We have very good relationships with the police officers there. We support them. We have cell phone numbers, texting back and forth. They complain to us very often about the lack of resources. Now, this relationship with the police union is different. And the police union, unfortunately, have allowed a certain individual who does not live in St. Louis, has never been a St. Louis police officer, Jeff Warder, to become the face of policing in St. Louis. and that is dangerous for our city. It is dangerous for the police officers because the rhetoric that he spews, it agitates folks at a time when people are already very tense, when tensions are already very high. And so, many of the comments and statements that he made during 2014, 2015 around Ferguson, around some of the unrest we saw in St. Louis City, and around our attempts to, which we ultimately did, pass civilian oversight in St. Louis City, I think was very divisive and destructive to that relationship at a time when we're trying to repair it. And so even with that being said, I still sit down and talk to them whenever they ask me to come. I will sit down and I talk to them and we disagree, sometimes loudly at the table. And when I went down to sit down with them most recently, I sit down with them with a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, one half is things that I think we agree on. There are several things I think we agree on. Starting pay for police officers in the city of St. Louis needs to increase. We have to become more competitive with St. Louis County. We need to make sure that our police department is fully staffed. This current condition where we have 120 police officer positions unfilled, and in order to make the department run, require officers to work mandatory overtime for very long periods of time is unsustainable, and it really damages morale. So those are things we can agree on. Let's fix those. Now, on the other side of the paper, some things we disagree on. I think every officer on duty needs to have a body camera. All right, this is something that, frankly, this is just where everything is going. We need to have a body camera on every officer patrolling the city of St. Louis, both for the protection of the public and the protection of the officer. We also need a higher level of accountability, and this is where I disagree with the police union, is that when an officer breaks the law and when an officer does something that results in the death of a citizen, we need to prioritize the mission of the police department and not defend the indefensible actions of a single officer. We have to protect that relationship, this very fragile relationship between the community and the police department at all costs. And I think that's where we disagree a lot. But I'm always willing to sit down and talk to them. And I think there are a lot of things that they're looking for this next administration to help with, especially in the area of benefits and pay and pension stuff. And there's also some things that I'll be looking for too, with regard to accountability.
What about the districts?
Yeah, so one of the horrible mistakes that Chief Dotson did was in his redistricting. Now, it's not just in reducing the number of districts from 9 to 6. It is in how he staffed those districts afterwards. And so he moved officers around and has really understaffed some of the areas that have needed the most officers, again, due to violent crime. What he says is that he has staffed officers based on calls for service. Now, the problem with that is that it treats all calls to 911 equally. So an area that gets a lot of calls for loitering gets the same number of officers as an area that gets a lot of calls for murder. Okay, so we need to prioritize murder over some of the petty crimes, because that should be the priority for the city. Again, it's not an either or, but we do have to prioritize reducing violent crime. And I think, again, that's an example of how he and his administration have not valued what is happening in many neighborhoods in the city.
All right. From Sam Dodson to Paul McKee. So the McKee project...
Going down the hit list.
I know. In some ways, though, he's an easy target. But in others, his project has seemed to be, one of those things where we know the North Side is wounded, we know it's suffering, and so his project gives that wound a name for the moment. And maybe it speaks to something else. Maybe the problem doesn't start with him as much as the process. You've been the only member of the Board of Aldermen, I think, to have voted against every piece of legislation related to his project.
Almost. I voted recently in favor of the hospital project at Pruitt-Igoe.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So, I mean...
Oh, you bastard.
No, come on.
And that's the only good thing it seems that have...
all three deads. So what is the lesson here? What went wrong? Why did you oppose these bills? And what, as mayor, could you do to make sure we get more than what looks like now to be a $20 million payout that went to settle debts and a gas station and a possible 3-bed hospital, and a lot of broken promises?
Yeah, so what went wrong with Paul McKee's project? All right, how much time do we have?
We only have 10 minutes. So
all right. So this is a project, as you guys know, I have been following in 3 different capacities, in fact. This is how far this goes back. First, as a journalist, when we were trying to figure out who was buying up all this different property secretly in this area under all kind of fictitious names and different LLCs. Then as a political consultant who at that time was working with different candidates as Paul McKee was asking for legislation at the state level and then the city level to authorize his project, and then as an alderman who had an opportunity to actually finally ask questions directly of Paul McKee and vote against some of his projects. The problem with Paul McKee's project is a problem that I mentioned earlier, which is the problem with all development in the city of St. Louis. It is very developer driven right now, and it is top down. And so when Paul McKee and others see that area of town, they see the land, they see the buildings, they don't see the people. And so their vision for what they want to see happen with that area does not involve any of the people who live in that area right now. And that, I think, is that is not what government should be doing. Government is here to serve people, not developers. And so what I always ask for in Paul McKee's project, and what Slay and everybody else and the majority of aldermen opposed, was deadlines and a level of accountability to make sure that he had to do what he promised to do, which, as you know, almost every one of his promises has been broken since the very beginning. As you know, there was a letter signed by the mayor 6 years ago, promised eminent domain would never be used on occupied homes in those areas, yet that is exactly what happened. They promised that the vision was not to flatten those folks' entire neighborhood and build big boxes, but that is exactly what's occurring. And so those folks are being moved out. Now that can't be the vision for how we want to see development happen in the city. That can't be the only way we think we can transform this city, is to move out the people and flatten their neighborhoods and put something there that does not involve them. So, you know, I think that moving forward, if it is a French administration, you know, McKee has bought his seat at the table. He owns so much of that land that in any plan that we want to do for that area, we're going to have to deal with him because he owns all that land over there. But what we can also do is set real goals and make him do what he promises he's going to do. And if not, put very harsh penalties in the development deal. And so we need an advocate on behalf of those people. We need somebody who is in these positions that actually cares about what is happening to the people that still live in those areas and not just looks at the possibilities of the land. And so when you start talking about things like community agreements, you know, that's what that's designed for, is to make sure that we aren't just taking people's land and moving them out who knows where, to the St. Louis County, or, you know, at a time when we really can't afford to lose population, you know, we're pushing people out, and I don't think that's the answer.
Okay, this is in part a question from the audience. I want to add on a brief front to the question. I want you to say something about Mayor Slay that you like that he's done, and something that you don't like that he has done or hasn't done. And this question from the audience is, what mayors have inspired you, and what innovative ideas would you implement from some other mayors somewhere else?
Okay. All right, so what do I like about
Plus and minus on Slay.
Okay. Let's see. So let me say, you know, the parts of town that have seen a lot of improvement, you know, both Slay and Rayford, and I call it the Slay-Rainford administration, they came in with an agenda. Their agenda was to transform downtown, to rebuild that area, rebuild the central corridor. In fact, it's spelled out clearly in the mayor's sustainability plan. The number one measure that a project is measured by is whether or not it reinforces the central corridor as a heart of the region. To that extent, he executed his plan very well. Now, the problem, of course, is that other areas have been neglected. And so while we have seen a lot of investment in the central corridor, and over the last census period, 20,000 people moved to that area, we saw 50,000 move out of the other areas. And so what they have not been able to do is actually serve the entire city. They have focused just on the central. Other thing I think he has done well, and this is admittedly a backhanded compliment, is he has amazingly convinced people that the mayor is responsible for nothing. You know, that
is that something you plan to continue?
That is, but it is an incredible accomplishment. You know, in most every other city you go to, people hold the mayor accountable. You know, like, crime is high. You know, and when you go to Chicago and you look at the news, man, reporters are chasing Rahm Emanuel down hallways and stuff. You know, but here, the mayor does not even have to answer a question about violent crime.
Definitely.
It's amazing. And so, I mean, just as a political student, that's amazing that he's done that. It has not been good for the city, but what was the second part of the question?
Other mayors you've known elsewhere that you might have been inspired by or thought good ideas from?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Cory Booker is as mayor was really inspiring.
Newark, right?
Yeah, in Newark, and of course he's a U.S. senator now. But when he was both in his first campaign for mayor, which he lost, but then also in his time as mayor, he was really a source of inspiration for me, and I kind of modeled how you know I perform as alderman based off how Cory Booker was as a mayor. You know, always out there using social media, engaging people, and you know, it always comes from this idea that you can't do everything yourself. All right, it's impossible for you to do everything you can't yourself. So one of the things you have to do as a leader is also inspire other folks to help. And I think Cory Booker did that very well, and he inspired me from afar.
Okay, just one brief follow-up on the Central Corridor. I think the Central Corridor, if you look at it, it's not even low-hanging fruit. It's fruit that's fallen into a basket. You have Warshoe, you have Barnes, you have things already there, and they're driving that train. That's a much easier thing to do than doing what you're proposing to do.
Let me tell you, being the alder person from the 28th Ward is a lot different than being an alderman from the 21st Ward. Okay, so you know, Lyda has been a part-time alderman for many years in the Central Corridor, but it's an area that has a lot of institutions, have a lot of very wealthy folks, a lot of private folks that put together most of the projects and proposals. In many areas in St. Louis, both in South St. Louis and North St. Louis, aldermen feel like they're on their own. And that they have to do all this stuff by themselves. They don't have the support of a lot of the big institutions that some of the Central Core wards have, and they don't have the support of the mayor, who really pushes everything down to the alderman. Most of an alderman's job, and at least on my side of town, has been answering things that really are the mayor's responsibility. And so, yeah, so it's been very different. And I think, you know, and that's why I've made this promise both to the public, to the Post-Dispatch, to my fellow aldermen, is that if I become mayor, the buck will stop with me. I will be responsible for the quality of life in all these neighborhoods. I'm not going to leave it up to the alderman of a blighted area that's been blighted for 25 years to have to come up with all the solutions by him or herself.
On the subject of aldermen and the mayor, this has come up in several of these evenings. There's been a custom to let aldermen sort of determine things ranging from liquor licensing to street closures to alley vacations to whether or not a 1,500 acre development should happen in their ward. I won't use the Smith anecdote on Cherokee Street, but you know, the Royale, we could be having this debate on Cherokee, I'm just going to say, if it wasn't for a certain alderman. So it goes. Well, we got to go to Yaki's afterwards, but but obviously this is a process where the other aldermen have assented to letting that alderman carry legislation that has sometimes citywide ramifications. For instance, a street closure may look good, it only affects like a one-block area, but if you're trying to get from, you know, the 9th ward to the 14th ward, you have to drive through the 20th ward, and the street's closed. You don't get through, right? And at least one of the other candidates, Lyda Kristen, said as mayor she would emphatically veto any bills to close streets in the future. What would you do as mayor as these things come to your desk, coming out of the board, assuming the Board of Aldermen doesn't radically change in the next couple months before you take office?
Yeah, so first, this system that has become known as aldermanic courtesy, this comes out of the reality that there is no central leadership. And so this comes out of not having a mayor who has a vision, a plan, or is involved in the entire city. And so what happens is, again, you know, one person comes up with an idea, all the other aldermen are busy doing basically what is the mayor's job in their wards. And so a system of, well, it's in your ward, you go ahead and do it. There is no central plan regarding traffic in the city. There is no central plan regarding liquor licenses. There is no central plan regarding stop signs. And so in lieu of that, you've got 28 different strategies. And so what you need is a mayor who knows the whole city, who understands that it is his or her responsibility to run the whole city, and comes up with a central plan for these different things. We haven't had that. And if we wound up electing another mayor who doesn't know this whole city, who doesn't have a clue about the needs of the different neighborhoods, they will, no matter what they promise you, they will default back to the alderman because they know it and they don't.
Should the city spend the time and resources on developing a new comprehensive plan? Our current one was passed in 1947.
Still not finished.
Yeah. So we are a city of 1,000 plans. What I think we need is finally having a leader who accepts responsibility for the entire city, who has a vision for the entire city, who understands the needs of the entire city, and understands how every neighborhood's success relates to everybody else. And so I think you need somebody in this position who finally has a vision for what we need to be as a city, and understands how each section of our town relates to that, and can push that forward. We have a lot of really good plans already on the books. What we don't have is anybody to execute any good plan.
Okay, this one had to come up. I paraphrase this. I'll ask her the submitted question, but it seems like we're on track to evict the homeless, which sounds like it's hard to do. What will you do to decriminalize homelessness in St. Louis? Specifically, do you support aggressive begging ordinances or public benches designed unfriendly, be uncomfortable for long-term use where you can't sleep on the bench, things like that?
Yeah, so let me first say, I think I'm the only candidate, at least of the major candidates, that has opposed what they're doing with Larry Rice's facility right now. I think it is unconscionable that we are, at this point now, giving $104 million to the richest people in town to upgrade their stadium. At the same time, we are shutting down a homeless shelter. Larry Rice and New Life Evangelistic Center, I think, have earned their seat at the table when we are talking about what the city is going to do to help homelessness. Has he always been a great partner? No. But he has not always had a great partner on the other side of the table either. The Slade-Rainford administration have for years taken this very adversarial relationship with New Life. They felt that part of their plan was to shut down New Life from day one, not to help build it, not to help improve the quality of service, not even to move it, but just to shut it down. And so that has become this adversarial relationship that's gone on now over a decade, going into a second decade. And now, on his way out the door, it looks like he might have finally accomplished what his goal has been, to shut down New Life. Now, the fact is that the people who seek shelter in his facility at night, we don't have, right now, enough beds to take all those people in right now. And so we have to address the basic need in St. Louis, which is there are too many people that don't have a place to stay at night. Some of them are chronically homeless, and some of them, like many of the children in St. Louis public schools, are basically homeless, and that they really don't know for sure where they're going to be sleeping a week from now. And so we need to do a better job as a city dealing with that. And I don't think penalizing or punishing people who are both homeless or the people who are coming to serve homeless people, people who are, I would say, fulfilling their Christian duty or their religious duty or their ethical duty to feed people who need food, that we have the treasurer's office removing all the parking meters down there, which then allows the police to tow anybody who comes down there to bring food or clothes. That's not what we should be as a city. That's not who we should be as a people. And so I don't think that is the correct approach. I would reopen negotiations with Reverend Rice and see if we can't work something out, either that location or another location, with some matching funds from the city to be able to help him in his mission and help us in our mission of providing shelter for folks who need it.
All right, I think we're getting in the home stretch, but we still haven't tackled the question of the city and the county.
All right.
And I'll just, city and the county and the county offices and the structure of government. What will they look like after 4 years of a French administration?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of folks who, and I think even Tony Messenger wrote an article this week in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch saying that for him, the top issue facing the city is about the city rejoining the county. Now, let me tell you, number one, I think the last thing the St. Louis County needs is a 91st municipality. So I think this idea of just simply rejoining the county doesn't help us accomplish our goals as a city, which is to try to increase the quality of life, try to make our neighborhoods more attractive, try to be more efficient at delivery of services, and actually be better with taxpayer money. Now, that being said, there are a lot of different ways that the city and county can cooperate, merge some of our the things that we do. But I think the big need for consolidation right now at this point is in St. Louis County. You know, when you have towns, municipalities, cities in St. Louis County that are a quarter of the size of the 21st Ward, but have their own mayor, board of aldermen, police department, cannot survive without ticketing my constituents that drive through their towns on the way to work or to a shop, then there is a need for consolidation out there. And so I'm not opposed to a plan that did consolidation in the region, but it would have to involve some consolidation within St. Louis County, and it would have to, in my eyes, make sure that we are improving service and quality of life for St. Louis City residents. And so the only thing that I've seen so far is this idea of just merging into the county again. I don't think that does it. Frankly, if you drive through St. Louis County in its northern part, they don't do that good a job at serving the interests of poor. They don't do a good job of dealing with disenfranchisement or economic disparity issues in St. Louis County. And I'll also say this, is that the idea of us thinking regionally and working regionally is something that involves more than just St. Louis City and St. Louis County. So St. Louis, you know, you find people from as far as St. Charles or all the way on the other side of the river who say they're in St. Louis. And so we do need some kind of a regional cooperation. I think what we've had for the last 16 years, at least on the St. Louis side, is a mayor and an administration that has not been very good at working with other folks. And we have especially seen this in the last couple of years with the new county executive in St. Louis County. There's not been the best of relationships there. And so again, I pledge to work with all of our leaders in the neighboring counties to try and improve quality of life for all our folks. But to answer your question, I don't think St. Louis County needs a 91st municipality.
But if we were, we wouldn't have to elect and fund a sheriff whose only job is transporting prisoners, or a recorder of deeds, or a treasurer who builds parking garage.
Yeah,
Could streamline the city government, right?
Well,
that's what someone's saying. And Mayor Slay went out on a limb with Advanced St. Louis early in his first term. Lost big time.
Yeah. Well, and why do they lose? Because ultimately you have to convince the people of St. Louis City and St. Louis County that the proposal is going to benefit them. And I think that has not been done yet. So if this is going to happen, it's going to happen over a long period of time. There has to be a proposal put together that makes sense to constituents on both sides of the county line. And it has to be done in a way that convinces people over a long period of time that this is going to improve their lots. And I don't think just merging us into the county does that. Now, what it does do is help folks who want control of a lot of the amenities of St. Louis City without the inconvenience of living in St. Louis City. And so, you know, they have an agenda to try to get more control over our assets and you know, some of the things in St. Louis City. And it is very inconvenient for them to have to deal with us pesky St. Louis City residents or elected officials. Look, you know, I'm focused on the big issues in St. Louis City, making this place safer, making it more attractive to people, and making sure this is a place that is growing instead of dwindling in population. St. Louis County, for the first time, as you know, in its last census, is losing population as well. And so they're having a lot of problems as well. So, you know, when you fly into St. Louis, you can see two competing downtowns. You see this Clayton downtown forming, this skyline of competing. We need to work better as a region, but again, I think that involves more than just St. Louis City and St. Louis County.
I have two last questions from the audience. This one is labeled incorrectly. It's a simple question.
No.
It's not.
Is it two-sided?
No, it's a short question, and a simple one. If you were mayor, what will you do to improve city schools?
Oh, that's so easy.
Simple question.
So look, first, St. Louis City and St. Louis Public Schools are two separate government entities. So as mayor, you don't have any direct control over the public schools. But like we do in my neighborhood through our North Campus project, what we do is partner with St. Louis Public Schools and provide wraparound services through after-school programming and weekend programming to help improve the quality of education for kids in our neighborhood. And we're showing tremendous results in the area of math, science, and reading. And so as mayor, what I would do is direct our Parks and Recreation Department to expand our recreation services to partner with nonprofits and others so that our recreation centers are places where kids can be after school and continue their education, to get their mentoring, to get their after school help, to make sure that we have safe places for kids to be in those hours where they usually get into trouble. And so there are a lot of things we can do to work with St. Louis Public Schools. In order to make our neighborhoods places where people want to move into instead of moving out of, we have to deal with the top two issues that drive people out of the city. Number one is crime. I've talked about this before, but also the quality of schools. Because too many people that, even the young folks, like folks in here, you move to the hip part of town, but when you guys start pairing off and having kids, the priorities change a bit. And many people leave the city when they get when their kids reach school age. And so what we have to do is make sure that every neighborhood in St. Louis has a quality school, preferably within walking distance of every home. And that's going to be a partnership between traditional public schools, charter schools, private schools. But we need to make sure that every neighborhood in St. Louis has a quality school in that neighborhood or near that neighborhood. And so as mayor, what I will do is work with St. Louis Public Schools, raise money for St. Louis Public Schools, prioritize that as a fundraising goal every year to raise money for St. Louis Public Schools, to help incentivize teachers living in the city, after-school programs for kids, and to strengthening that bond with the neighborhood. Because we have too many schools that really don't have bonds with the neighborhoods they're located in.
All right, I've got a question, more philosophical. We hear this term a lot in city politics these days, progressive, often used for positive, but sometimes used negatively, like this candidate's the real progressive, this candidate's not progressive.
Yeah.
And personally, I think it's an ambiguous term. I'm a socialist, though, so I don't understand this word. Are you a progressive candidate for mayor? And if so, what does that word mean to you?
Yeah,
Help me out.
I'm a progressive who gets shit done. I'm about getting stuff done, and of course I'm a progressive. I'm a Democrat in the old sense of the world, not this new trickle-down Democrat that we see too many of. I'm about getting stuff done though, and making sure that we are serving people in our neighborhoods, making sure we are acknowledging the humanity of all the people who live in this city, and making sure that we understand that everybody needs to feel equally protected under the law. They need to feel that the city and their local government is working on their behalf and not working against them, and making sure we are focusing on the issues that matter to the people who live in this city. I think too often our agenda in St. Louis City is being set by folks who don't even live in the city. And so the idea that in the last 14 months we've had 3 stadium proposals, but not a single proposal that would actually improve the neighborhood that you live in, I think shows a lack of leadership and a lack of direction. So yeah, I'm a progressive, but like I said, I'm a progressive that gets shit done.
All right, I'm gonna follow up with a question from the audience, which is on this topic in this round. Why should I vote for you over Tashara Jones? I'm impressed by both of you.
All right, well, that's a fair question. So let me go back to the get shit done part. All right, so I am somebody who actually has a record of accomplishment. We get stuff done. We have improved the quality of lives of people in this city and in my neighborhood. This isn't just talk. This isn't about I read a plan and I'm going to implement this plan. I can take you to an area that looked like crap 5 years ago and now is a place of hope and opportunity. So we transform stuff, and that's what I want to do for the city. I think there are other candidates, without naming them, there are other candidates in this race that people have pinned a lot of hopes to and kind of created what they could be. I just want you to see what I've done. Judge me on what I've done. And not just over the last 2 years, 4 years, over the last 16 years. From back when I was a journalist, working hard, trying to get stories out and uncover the truth about what's happening in our government, to the time I worked on political campaigns just to try to elect really good people to office, and then all the work I've done as an elected official. I think I've put in the work and I've proven myself over the last 16 years in this city. And like I said, I have a record of accomplishment.
Another question from. Is that working here? Or
Hello.
Mayday,
Mayday, we're going down. Okay, the last question from the audience for me. Do you have a jobs plan for young, underprivileged African-American youth? And I think this question refers to something that you would do as mayor, not so much what you've already done.
Sure. Well, let me tell you what I've done. So when we built the O'Fallon Park Recreation Complex in the 21st Ward,
Hold on, my son Brian Wilson's a lifeguard there right now.
Is he?
He's saving lives right now.
Well, thank you. Thank him. And so that facility that we built, we actually had to go to war over this project to make sure it was done in a way that put people to work who really needed opportunity. And so that project was built with the largest level of minority participation in any project in St. Louis, 44%. And so those are putting people to work that would not get an opportunity. And so my vision for this city is to use these projects that we are doing. We've got a good $2 billion of development coming up in St. Louis City just in the next 24, 36 months. These are projects that can transform lives. And if we concentrate these opportunities in St. Louis City, to put St. Louis City people to work, that helps build our neighborhoods. That helps build our communities. That helps reduce crime. And so as part of my comprehensive crime plan, it doesn't call for just police. It calls for also having slate offices. Those are job placement offices, satellite job placement offices located right there in those neighborhoods. So we are matching people with available jobs. We also have to keep in mind that in St. Louis City, 20% of our adult population does not even have a high school diploma. So we have to make sure we are always looking for opportunities to get them into training programs. So when new construction projects come up, or when we're building new buildings downtown, we have to require that there's apprenticeships for St. Louis City people, that we are providing pathways to get people who have been chronically unemployed into a position to actually provide for their families legally. So it's all connected. Too often we see these problems in silos. We see like crime is over here, and then education is over here, and then small businesses and jobs are over here. It's all related. If we're going to transform this city, it starts with transforming neighborhoods, and to do that, we need to focus on all of those things at the same time.
Oh. All right, so much has been made about the fact that of the front runners, there are 4 African American candidates, 1 white candidate. In recent weeks, we've had Tashara Jones being endorsed by Jordy LaForge from LeVar Burton. We've had Patrick Stewart, David Stewart endorsing Lois Reed. We've had candidates, all over the place.
People live in St. Louis City, right?
Right, none of them live in St. Louis City, but that gets to what I'm driving at here, which is these endorsements are farther and wider and less expected than in previous races where 4 African American candidates and 1 white candidate might have been seen as a certain outcome going in a very certain way with a certain set of votes going in each way, one set split. But Tashara reaching out nationally, you were getting the Post's endorsement. Lewis is coming from the South Side, shows that maybe there's a different politics at play. Where do you think this race is going to fall? What's going to determine who wins?
Yeah, so I think it's very easy for folks to just look at the color of everybody's skin and say, oh, I see how this is playing out.
But people are probably doing that right now.
All right, but when you look at the different candidates, a lot of us, may have the same color skin, but we're all very different. very different backgrounds. And so I don't see this race as simply one white candidate and 4 leading black candidates. You know, I see people on different degrees of being progressive. I see people with different levels of accomplishment, people who are more talk, and then people who have actually done stuff. And I think that's how most voters are going to see this thing. If we continue to be a city where, first of all, most people don't vote, where you have 20 to 25% turnout in local elections, and then the majority of those folks just vote for the person who kind of looks like them, then the future of our city is not looking very good. If we continue down this old path, then, you know, I don't have much hope. But that's not been what I've experienced when I'm going out knocking on doors across the city. I see people hungry for change. And I see people, the more and more this race has gone on and progressed, as we go into these last few races, they see this as a clear contest between status quo and change. And then when they decide they want change, they start looking at the different change candidates and say, who's real and who ain't? Who's got a real record of accomplishment and who's just talk? And so I think the next 2 weeks are going to be decisive because this is when people are starting to pay attention. And so I think you know, I'm very hopeful about the next 2 weeks. I'm very hopeful about the future of the city, that we are finally going to move into a direction that actually gives us real change and real opportunity to make our city a place that we all want it to be, where people are happy and proud to be in the city, where we are not on the front page of every newspaper once a year for some negative stuff, being the most violent or having more unrest, where we are actually on the cover of papers as being an example of how a city can turn around its fortune and become a leader in progressive thought and actually have a population increase for the first time in a very long time in our history.
A quick follow-up. I want to thank your campaign for not... Take that. I want to thank your campaign for not bombarding my inbox and my email with constant announcements of this elected official or that and endorsing you.
No, we just email you asking you for money.
Right. Well, you know.
You get those?
That's fair.
We don't have your email
I don't know.
add you to
I think
our
the dog
email.
must have grabbed that at the door. Isn't that how that comes in?
Check your spam box.
But anyway, you know, I see the other campaigns and they're touting these laundry lists of committee people and you know, obviously the national figures. Does any of that matter anymore in the 21st century? Will that drive votes on March 7th?
No, I think I think there are very few endorsements that matter. All right, I think in
What
this.
about Francis Slade?
I think. Well, I do. I think endorsements. I think the two biggest endorsements in this race have been Francis Slade's endorsement and the Post-Dispatch endorsements. I think those are the two that most people recognize locally. And the committee people stuff, you know, maybe 30, 40 years ago, but you know, I think most folks right now are making their mind up themselves. And what endorsements do is sometimes give you a certain level of credibility. And I gotta say, you know, the Post-Dispatch endorsement, I think for some older folks, gave me a level of accountability. TJ, what is, you know, what, yeah?
We can argue that later, but go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I think some of those matter, but ultimately, I think people are they have enough time in these last couple of weeks to kind of decide for themselves.
Well, I would say two things at the end here, and I'll ask you a catty question at the end. Well, first of all, on STLMag.com, I did a piece about the demographics, and from 2006 to 2015, the number of college-educated, college-degreed, 25 to 35-year-olds in the city of San Luis doubled from 15,000 to 30,000. There's nothing like that anywhere in the region. In St. Charles, it went down. In St. Louis County, it went up a couple thousand, but it's doubled in the city. So you have a different demographic than you had 20 years ago. The Slay has never had a history of transferring his political capital to any candidate he's ever endorsed, unless that candidate was going to win anyway. I remember back in 97, he endorsed Bosley. His ward, the 23rd ward, Bosley got 227 votes. Harmon got 5,000.
Yeah.
So I mean, when he endorses somebody, it's not even writing a check. So I think there's a different dynamic now. And I would argue, yeah, I think you're getting the Post-Dispatch endorsement is important and surprising, but it's not what it was 20, 30 years ago because not that many people read the paper anymore. But it's still a good thing. I'm not being critical.
And let me tell you though, is that when you look at this race with so many different people running, the fact is that two things. Regarding the election, it is very likely that the person who wins this race will win with 75 to 80% of the people voting against them.
That's true.
Okay? And so there's going to be a smaller number you need to win the election. And then after the election, that is important because you need to have somebody in there who from day one is starting to build those bridges. To say that even though you didn't vote for me, I still represent you. And I am still going to serve you and represent you and earn your vote the next time. If we have somebody else, and I do criticize the Slay administration for doing this, especially under Rainford, is that for them it was just about getting that win number. Right. It was just about getting that win number and then proceeding with our agenda. If 49% of the population voted against me, so be it. I'm sticking with my agenda. And there was never really that reconciliation, that reaching out. And so I think it would be incumbent on whoever wins this election to make sure that we are reconciling our city and we are reaching out, not just a week after election, but years afterwards to make sure that we are all feeling that we are represented by whoever is the mayor.
And the last thing I'd written down earlier, I forgot to ask. There was a Timble's Business Journal article that really had some trouble with the paper work on your nonprofit. You lost your tax exemption for a while. What was up with that?
Yeah, so we had our nonprofit started 5 years ago. We operated for the first 3 years as simply a regular state nonprofit. Then we applied for a 501c3 status. It took a year to get it, and when we got it, 3 weeks after we got it, they said we're taking it away because you didn't file the paperwork from the previous 3 years. We said, well, we weren't a 501c3 before. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. You had to file it before you became a 501c3. And so we said, okay, when we redid the paperwork, refiled, and hopefully within the next few months they'll answer our call and get it back to us. But it has not prevented us in any way from doing the service we did. We had it for a very short period of time. It didn't affect any donations or anything like that. And the main thing is we continue to serve 125 kids every day, and we're expanding.
All right. Final question. I won't be catty. We're talking about travel, but we won't talk about who pays for it. You talked earlier about Cory Booker as sort of a role model or an example, but how about another city? We're talking a lot about criticizing St. Louis getting things wrong on standing up for poor people, black people, creating this divided geography. Is there a city that's getting it right now, and what would that be?
When I was looking at my crime plan and looking at cities that had a lot of success with making communities safer, one I looked at was Tampa. Tampa a few years ago, many years ago, was right up there with St. Louis among the most violent places, having a very high homicide and rate of shootings. And the level of community policing, turning that narrative around, I think can provide an example. Now, they also use a lot of technology as well. But they also got down to basics of rebuilding that really broken relationship with the community. And so I look at Tampa, especially regarding crime and rebuilding that relationship.
All right. Closing statement, Antonio?
All right.
Well,
thank you.
Please.
Well, it's not. First, let me say it's not completely closing because I plan to be here for a little while, spinning some records here for your musical pleasure.
Right. And you're officially invited back 4 years from now when we do this again.
No problem. But I want to thank you all for coming here, spending this evening listening to me, and really listening to the different candidates. I know many of you raised your hand and said you were undecided. Did I win any of you over? A few? Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, we still have about 2 weeks till this election. And this is an opportunity for this city to actually have real change for the first time in a very long time. And so, I am very focused on making sure that people understand they have a choice. Many people have not participated in these elections in recent years because they feel like it's just the same old. You have clear choices this time, and even if you don't come out and vote for me, please come out to vote. Because the worst thing that happens in this city is when we have 80% of people staying home. if 80% of people stays home, there's two things happen. One is you're going to get somebody who didn't have to get very many votes to get that position, and very often it operates about this position where I'm only going to serve the people who voted for me. But then you also have a signal sent to that person that there is so little interest that I can do whatever I want to do because nobody's really going to show up and hold me accountable. So we have to have accountability in the mayor's office, and we really need it at all levels of government, starting with the president all the way down, definitely with the president. We need a level of accountability. And so, you know, one of the things that I had agreed to with the Post-Dispatch that they mentioned in their endorsement of me was that I agreed to a 6-month report card. Every 6 months, they will rate me on what I have promised to do and how well I'm accomplishing those goals on behalf of the city of St. Louis. So I would ask for your support, ask for your chance to serve as your mayor, and to actually deal with the issues of our entire city and bring this city together so that we can move forward as one community in one St. Louis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Antonio. I'm sure no matter what happens, we'll be doing this again in 4 years.
Looking forward to it.
The crowded field will probably be crowded again in 4 years, and that's probably good for the people and good for the city.
Very good.
So don't forget to vote on March 7th. If you're watching us 2 weeks from now on YouTube, you're either being paid by one of the other campaigns or you're an interested voter seeing this on our YouTube channel. If you're listening to this while jogging through O'Fallon Park or Tower Grove Park, you're listening to this on the Royale's new podcast. Now available on iTunes. We broke the barrier. We got 5 of these out there.
Nice, nice.
And if you're about to get another free beer, you're me or DJ Wilson.
I think it's for one more free beer.
Yeah. So, all right, Antonio, it's up to you. Take it away. Spin it all night long, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Now,
Mayoral Candidate Dance Party.
yes.
And all other candidates are officially invited to come back and spin.
It might turn into
Contact Steve
karaoke.
Smith.
It may turn into karaoke. Maybe.
Oh, there